Thank you, panellists. Lorna, I'm going to start with you. I know one of the things you wanted to talk about was peer support. We've talked a lot about some of the things that companies and employers can do, structures they can put in place today to ensure that they have, best practices happening at their workplace. But what about peer support? We haven't touched on it quite as much today. It comes with its own psychosocial risks, though, doesn't it? Can you just, tell us about your experiences when it comes to that network of peer support?
It's an interesting question, given that it is peer support is an excellent way of encouraging mental health questions. So the question that was asked and not necessarily the previous speaker wasn't comfortable answering, peer support is one of the ways that can encourage mental health discussions. It's not the only way. You also need to develop a culture where that is safe for such discussions. But peer support is, I'll actually go as far as to say it's a magical tool, and I think Damien will agree with me, because it utilises a strength you already have in your company. Every single company has a community, and what it does is it leverages that strength that's already in your organisation and to support people at the time that they need it. So in your organisation, I bet if I ask every single person in this audience to think about who is the go-to person in your organisation, I bet you can think of at least one or two people that you would go to if you had a problem. And what peer support does is formalise that process so that that person is trained to be a supporter of other people and to support help seeking. And they're only part of the solution. It's not the whole solution, but it's a very, very good part of the solution. But you also asked me about safety. If you are doing a peer support model, you have to consider, and when you do your risk assessment, their psychosocial safety is important. And so a good peer support model, and I'll be interested to see if Damien agrees with this, but a good peer support model will build in two really, really, really vital things about a good peer support model. One is confidentiality. Peer support models will always fail when there's a breach of confidentiality. As soon as staff don't trust it, it's going to fail. But the second is ensuring your peer supporters are safe, and that requires that they're trained, that they have their own self-care plan. What the training does is makes them feel empowered, that they have a self-care plan, and that they have an opt-out, a no-judgment opt-out process. Because at any given time, as great as they are, life can get on top of them and they need to be able to opt out. So has that answered the question? I
think so. I'm curious to hear about your own experience with Lifeline. I've been lucky enough to meet some of your Lifeline call takers, incredible people, but I can just imagine the emotional toll it takes on them. How do you ensure that your staff are safe when they're right at the coalface and dealing with people who are experiencing their darkest moments?
Yeah, well, I will surprise no one that Lifeline WA, that for us, psychosocial hazard is a major risk, and particular as most of our frontline, so we have about 300 crisis supporters who are volunteers, so most of these people are volunteers. So we have had to put in place, it's like layers of an onion. There's not one solution that will provide there isn't one solution, it is an integrated solution. But talking about it lightly or easily, we have a check-in, check-out process where an in-shift support checks in, makes sure they're okay, checks out. But I think for this conference, the most important part of our support is what we call wellbeing coordinators. So they are the crisis supporters who support the crisis supporters. So they are a team that does two things. They actively identify emerging psychosocial hazards or emerging issues. And the second thing they are there is they are there to support the crisis supporter who might be struggling. We have other things like practice supervision and peer-to-peer support, but that wellbeing support is really highly valued. We established it originally just as a pilot, and the crisis support is probably one of the things the crisis supporters value most.
Okay. Damien, tell us about Mates. How did it come about? How does it work?
Yeah, cool. I will be mentioning suicide and talking about suicide. There's no graphic content, so if it does impact anybody, feel free to give us a call on their 24-hour number, 1300 642 111, or Lifeline on 13 11 14. We are here to support you. If you're being impacted in the room, my colleague Sean is standing over there if you need to go and have a yarn with him, all right? If you're just going for a wee and he follows you out, it's going to get really awkward. So flick him the thumbs up, all right? So the Mates organisation is a not-for-profit organisation. We started in Queensland 16 years ago. Currently, at the moment, we lose approximately 190 people to suicide within our industry. That's a worker every second day. Lorna can back us up. The ABS has just released figures recently that there's been 3,249 reported suicides across all of Australia. That's every sector. Suicide is real, all right? There's been an increase in suicide across Australia in the last few years. It's madness that this is still happening. So our aim to reduce that figure is getting out into construction, mining, energy projects, and driving that figure down by providing a multi-model peer support program. We're not the only organisation who provides these peer support programs. The Resourceful Minds do an awesome job as well, but you need to do something. These psychosocial codes of practices, finally, they're here. You're putting the psychological safety and the physical safety on the same par, which is about time. So we get out, we provide a training program. So our utopia, the Mates utopia, is not to have a job. We want to build a suicide safer community by upskilling the industry and walking away from the industry. Say, yep, we have left this industry in a better place than we found it. It's a 3-stage program. The first one is a blanket training session, which is a general awareness training. It's an awareness training, gives facts, figures, statistics, but gives really basic skills so you can see if a workmate or a loved one is struggling. You probably don't realise it, but you spend more time at work than you do at home with your loved ones. So you notice those changes in the person, and when you start throwing regional locations out there, you spend a lot of time with that person. I spent years out in the bush. I know how lonely a 4x4 room feels, all right? So that general awareness, it normalises seeking help, and it normalises offering help as well. So you work 12 hours with that person beside you. Shit, you're hitting the piss pretty hard at the minute. Your quality of work is dropping. I'm worried about you. What is going on? So you start normalising those conversations. Our second stage is the start of the peer support, which is similar to the Resourceful Minds one. So you have go-to people. I've noticed old mate is hitting the piss pretty hard. They're not fronting up for work. I mightn't have the confidence to have that conversation. You're one of our connectors. Can you go and have a yarn with that person? And then that person, that peer support, will go across and have that difficult conversation, keep the person safe, and connect them into help. And then the last stage, the third stage that we deliver, is a 2-day suicide intervention training where they've got the skills to do a full-blown suicide intervention. So it's about building capacity and creating a safer community. Our community is the mining, construction, energy, all those spaces. Your community is your workplaces. So you need to build a suicide safer community in your community. And that's why I think these psychosocial codes of practices is awesome, because now you have to do something. You have to be doing something to support the well-being of your workers. So yeah, start building those communities, and we do it. We've got very passionate staff. I'm a rat bag tradie. I'm an ex-digger driver, so sitting up here is pretty overwhelming, so it is. Sean's an ex-Sparky, and we've got ex-Scaffies, ex-ceiling fixers, just rat bags from the industry. So we come out into workplaces and we speak to the industry at their level. We use digestible language. We stay away from big words because we don't know any, all right? But that's why people connect with us, because we use real language where people from the industry, born and bred from the industry, and we know how difficult the industry is. And then we also offer case management, which is one-on-one support for people in the industry, and also a 24-hour support service as well, which that number I give, and it's also for the family members as well. So we're very fortunate that we're funded by the Department of Mines, and our case management is funded by the Mental Health Commission. So we're not the charity who's rattling the tin asking for money. We want your people, not your money. So that's what we're doing, trying to reduce the suicide rate, and how we're doing it. All right.
Thank you, Damien. Did you take a breath then?
No, I can speak underwater as well. It's pretty cool, isn't it? No, because this class is putting me off pretty hard.
That's incredible. Thank you, Damien. While Damien takes a breath, Julia, tell us about unions. What is your role in terms of educating and supporting your members, particularly in light of the new act that's come in the last year or two, how the role of unions in doing that has changed, particularly with a more prescriptive act?
Thank you very much, Tim. Look, it's great to be here today, and I just want to acknowledge the fellow panellists and the work that Mates is doing and Lifeline, and I really feel for those those 300 people that you mentioned taking the calls, especially during this cost of living crisis. So I was fortunate enough to join Unions WA at a really exciting time just in the lead up to our new work health and safety legislation, and I felt very privileged coming into this role. Prior to that, I was working with workers directly at the coalface, as we've spoken about, and hearing firsthand all about psychosocial hazards, even though we didn't necessarily call them that and have that umbrella term over many years. So I absolutely agree with you there in terms of we have these codes of practice, let's fully embrace them. I'll put my hand up and be brave and say, I don't know everything there is to know about psychosocial hazards. It's still a learning process for me. And I hope everyone can feel safe enough to say that as well, that we all have a lot to learn, and being here today or joining us online is a really great start. Tim, what were the further comments you wanted to...
Just if you want to talk about what the union is doing in terms of helping to support and educate people in this space.
Yeah, look, a big part is the sessions we've been running to, promote the Act overall and the key changes. And then the psychosocial hazard sessions have been incredibly popular. We've been running them for well over a year now. So I want to acknowledge the Demers Peak Body Grants program that we were a recipient of there, as well as the other bodies that also received grants. So and combined with all the WorkSafe roadshows that happened early on, it's really very much a team effort. But I still think there's a lot of education to do. I think, let's face it, the term psychosocial hazards can be a bit confusing to people. It's hard for people to get their heads around that, and I really like some of the guidance that's come out from different regulators in terms of, what psychosocial hazards sound like. I think that really resonates a lot, and calling things like workload, calling things like trauma, violence and aggression, those are psychosocial hazards, and labelling it as psychosocial hazards. So that's been a key part of what we've been doing, but there's more work to do. All unions need to, really ramp up, and we talked about that sense of urgency that's needed. If we look at the stats, those have just been growing and growing, and we do need to try and see those stats, change and reduce. So there's much more work to do.
Thank you. Can you think of any examples and give us any examples of the more prevalent psychosocial hazards that you're coming across as you go to workplaces around WA?
Okay, look, I think we can all agree that workload issues are incredibly, prevalent in lots of different workplaces, and us as safety people as well, we experience that too. We're not, as we put our hands up today, we're not immune from psychosocial hazards. So, staffing pressures, all of those things are creating so much pressure on staff and increasing that psychological distress out there. A few things in particular that have come up from some of the sessions we've run. I just want to talk about translators and interpreters. So these are people that are contracted to do that very important translating work, usually through different PCBUs under a contract to the Department of Health. Look, they, obviously the things that they are translating are traumatic in themselves, okay, and that they experience vicarious trauma from that. But we have to look at, the job design. If you're being told that you've got to show up for a job, but you don't know what potentially you could be translating, you don't have any opportunity to opt out of, that type of work, and you might be doing that day after day after day, just like, the Lifeline volunteers who, we have that obligation to them, the same as workers now. So, so the job design really needs to be rethought, I think, in the space of people that are working as translators and interpreters. Probably not a role that you and I think commonly about, but yeah, I hope today I've brought some awareness to some of the psychosocial hazards that translators and interpreters face.
Thank you. Lorna, this might be one for you, just on the idea of a peer support network. We've talked about the merits of having a strong peer support network, but the comment has been made that it might be a way for a company to avoid having more professional support. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that there is that risk. The point has been made a lot today about the importance of understanding what your risk is and having the right treatments. And a peer support model is definitely a treatment, but it's not the whole solution. So you can't tap a few people on the shoulder, send them off for training and go, that's my psychosocial hazards managed. There is always a role for EAP, and there is a need for other mitigations such as job redesign or increasing of resources, whatever are the relevant mitigations for your workplace. But a peer support model is not a catch-all or a solution for everything. Definitely not a panacea. It's part of a broader network. And peer support models work, and you heard Damien describe the Mates in Construction model, which is a concentric circle building a network of support. Whatever design, and Lifeline works with organisations to customise and bespoke peer support models, but they all rely on a network, and that also relies on the organisation having in place policies and procedures and other supports within the organisation. So it's only part of a solution, but it's a really valuable part of the solution, because one of the hardest things that companies find is how do you encourage those conversations, and peer support models encourage those conversations.
Damien, do you want to add to that at all? I suppose this is something that's in your wheelhouse as well. Peer support network, as good as they can be, you've got to still have the professional supports in place too, I'm guessing, particularly if you're dealing with people who are in a very low place.
Yep, so that peer support model does work, but it's not the only stopgap. I think it was Dean mentioned earlier about the continuing reviewing it. What else do you put in place? By swinging the card at someone saying, here's your employee assistance program, that doesn't work either. So you have to have all these initiatives in place to actually create a positive, mentally healthy workplace. But you need stuff in place. Just having the resourceful minds, the MATES program and an EAP, not good enough. You need leadership training, you need coaching, you need diversity training, you need sexual harassment training, you need bullying, workplace bullying. You need to throw the kitchen sink at this, because what's good for the goose isn't as good for the gander. So you need to keep educating the people in our community on all fronts, so you can actually build that psychosocial safe workplace. So it's not just a one-stop shop, it has to be across the board.
Can we talk about now best practices when it comes to people wanting to report hazards in the workplace? What is the standard that people in the room or people watching online should be aiming for as employers, whether it's providing just a safe mechanism for people to report things, whether it's providing anonymity? Perhaps Julie, you might be able to shed some light on that. What do you, as someone from Unions WA, offer so people can report things and not feel like they're going to face some sort of persecution themselves?
Look, spot on. When reporting, you need to feel psychologically safe. Just like when you stuff up with something at work, and you disclose that, and the response needs to be appropriate. One example, I was doing a training session, and I went to my boss afterwards, and I said, "Oh, look, I stuffed up with something. I feel terrible," and the response was, "That's okay. I stuffed up too. This is what I did," and it was just this huge sigh of relief that and I know I have a psychologically safe workplace, but I know many people don't. But that has to come from leadership first and foremost. I would say in this space that the role, I think Marcus emphasised it previously, the role of health and safety reps is absolutely vital and underrated. And I would really encourage everyone here to embrace the role of health and safety reps, and really invest in those structures because they are going to help you meet your consultation duties. And you are going to have better and safer workplaces for having more health and safety reps. There is research in this space. So I'm unashamedly giving a huge plug and a shout out to all the health and safety reps. I know there's some in this room here today as well. So I think a health and safety rep, is able to gather lots of feedback and present that to the company, and workers can be anonymous in that process as well. A health and safety rep should of course be checking and doing that informed consent that we've spoken about today as well, but that is giving the workers a voice to raise their concerns. I'd really encourage everyone to think more about those work health and safety structures and safety reps.
Yep. Damien, do you find people who reach out to mates want to remain anonymous initially? Is anonymity a big thing for you?
Yeah, it's huge. I'm probably not going to win too many fans with what I'm going to say now, but I'll give it a crack. I think organisations need to create a good, healthy culture where people feel safe. Dean mentioned that earlier about safety, about creating that safe environment and trust and stuff like that, having that in the environment. Because if you're reporting up to a leader or a manager who don't know their responsibilities, what are you going to get? Here's a window seat. There you go, see a little troublemaker. So that's anonymity or whatever it's pronounced. We see it all the time. But now this is the bit where I'm not going to win too many fans. I think the regulator could help some of the people in this community by providing good, strong guidelines on reporting. What does reporting? There's still education has to come from the top, not just from the boots on the ground. We still need help on what does reporting look like? How do we do this? How do we create these safe environments where people feel safe, to feel trusted that they can report? Because I'm fairly lucky that I'm looking at industry on a regular basis, speaking to HR, speaking to safety, and there's so wide interpretations of these psychosocial codes of practices, and this reporting is a big one. What does that look like? A PCBU? What about Bob the concreter from Armitt who's got 3 people working for him? What's going to happen there? If that's anonymous, I've only got 2 people and I can pick which one, get out, you're gone. So that's there need to be a better reporting structure there, and I think as a community we probably need a little bit of help and a little bit of guidance on that as well.
Lorna?
I guess one of the things that as leaders we need to consider is how exactly do you create a psychologically safe workplace? And Lifeline WA, just like any other organisation, has had to wrestle with that, because when people are concerned about reporting because they're scared about consequences, and they don't necessarily want to test that when it's something serious. So I'll take an example of our incident reporting. So it won't surprise you, we're very committed to continuous improvement and to safety and quality. So the cornerstone for us is our incident reporting system, and it probably is for most of you. For a start, we don't make that bureaucratic. Everything goes in there. We'll work out what sort of hazard it is later. But the second part of it is that we deliberately use it as a process of celebration. So every staff meeting, we circle back and let people know how many things have been reported, and we talk about what are the trends. So we always feed it back so that it doesn't just become a black hole. The second is that we use it as an opportunity to find examples of good practice, and we celebrate those, so that incident reporting is an opportunity for best practice. Then, of course, there is the very obvious thing that when something is reported, a continuous improvement opportunity is identified, not an opportunity for punitive practice. So I think we don't look, in this process, we don't actually look at the positives of all this and the opportunities that this presents.
Okay. We might move into some of the questions. We're getting a whole bunch of questions come through. Speaking of anonymity, most of the questions submitted this afternoon are anonymous, so that's a great indication, I suppose, of how important anonymity is to people, particularly in asking difficult questions. I want to start with the latest question to come in. How do we encourage volunteering for peer support roles, particularly in organisations where the work that they do is already caring for other people, like people in education, healthcare, aged care, that sort of thing. I think even first responders, if there are first responders in the room, like classic example, so much of their day-to-day work is helping people, getting them to help again as a peer support person. How do you do that?
I think that the training is the key, because these people who are in caring sectors enjoy acquiring further skills, formal skills around caring. So what we have found, and with Resourceful Mind, I guess those are not caring, that tends to be resources sector, but we have worked with organisations in health and education to roll out their peer support. The first thing is that people do have to volunteer. You can't tap them on the shoulder, but getting the right person is important. It needs to be someone the staff want, but also someone that management trusts. We haven't really seen that be a problem, because I'll quote someone from Resourceful Mind. So one of our Resourceful Mind peer supporters, they're called minders in that sector, said to me once when I was talking to them about why they became a minder and what they liked about it, and they said, people came to me anyway, now I feel empowered to do something. So it is through that skills development of something they're already interested in, and feeling more empowered, I think.
Damien, one that's been directed specifically to you. Mates has worked really hard to create that peer-to-peer support structure at the work front level. Are you seeing the same buy-in at senior level as well?
Yeah, so we have got extremely passionate field officer staff. Sean's an ex-Sparky draftsperson who walked away from the industry to sit in this side of the fence. We've got the rest of our team are ex-trades, ex-construction, ex-FIFO workers, all born and bred from the industry. So if they're not delivering our face-to-face training sessions, they're out speaking to job sites, companies, organisations, so it's all face-to-face. So they're creating a bit of a groundswell. And myself and Liam, who's our CEO, we're coming in at a middle and senior management level. So the guys are getting the buy-in from the ground, and we're getting the buy-in, we're coming in at a more higher level, explaining that your organisation needs to get into these psychosocial codes of practices. We're not the one-stop gap. We can support parts of the psychosocial well-being, so we can. So we're starting to get buy-in from the top and from the bottom. So when you're getting it at both ends, it works. So yeah, we're getting buy-in from the top and the bottom.
Yeah. Lorna, I know Lifeline has some relationships with corporates as well. Are you finding the same thing? Is there more willingness at senior leader level as well to start buying into managing psychosocial hazards?
Being really frank, I think it's mixed. So I think that in some organisations, it's considered, here's the funding, go and make it happen. And leadership doesn't buy in. The organisations where leadership do buy in are there is a significantly better return on investment. So there still is, this is an emerging area, there still is, I guess, sceptics or people who feel too time poor or it's not their own priority. But the quality of leadership buy-in does impact the quality of the response.
Joy, I'm going to direct this question to you, but I do so with some trepidation. The question is around subtle racism in the workplace and people wanting to report that, or people wanting to know how to handle that. I imagine that is something that a worker might want to contact their union about. But I suppose we're talking about the subtle end, not the worst examples of racism, but if they feel like they're being subjected to that subtle end of racism. Is there a threshold at which you have to step in and get involved in that?
Yeah, look, I just want to acknowledge that, there are a lot of people out there experiencing subtle racism. Look, as for a threshold, under the Work Health and Safety Act, the test is if it's causing harm, if those actions are causing harm to a person. So, but But look, sorry, are we approaching this from the person experiencing the subtle racism or the bystander?
Well, either,
probably
I
both.
suppose, whether you're an observer or the subject of it.
Yeah, look, if that was happening to a member, I would advise them to be taking notes and perhaps to talk to their health and safety rep if they feel comfortable doing that. Obviously, advising them to talk to their manager if they feel comfortable with that. But let's face it, not all workers are going to be comfortable doing that. And you know, they may second guess whether they should report it or not, which is exactly what we're talking about. But, you know, there has to be different reminders and prompts and education around what is and isn't appropriate in the workplace so that that person feels confident saying, no, I will not accept that. Unions, are always there to support our members through building these health and safety structures, that's us doing our job where we can grow health and safety reps.
A question without notice here. I'm not sure if you can answer it or not, but do you get many people reach out to you with a complaint or a story to relate to you along those lines?
We receive a variety of reports, or either to the peak body as Unions WA or, through the union offices as well. There's lots of things happening at any one stage that, there wouldn't be many workplaces out there where, there isn't, problems being raised, There's one, at the far end of the spectrum, there's one workplace we're currently working with the members. They felt simply too afraid to talk to their leadership because the leadership were also the perpetrators of some really serious psychosocial hazards. These workers wanted some support, and so they are going to go external from the company. We have to recognise there's natural power imbalances in companies, so, unions are always going to have a place. There's a lot to be said about union membership numbers. I know some people are probably reflecting on that, but the reality is, even if you're not a paying member of a union, you are probably likely to look up to what the union is doing and follow the direction of the union as well on key issues.
I wonder if subtle racism or low-level racism falls within that incivility. Was that the term, incivility?
Incivility, yeah, that's the word of the day.
That, which is that it's the beginning, and it will compound, and it's problematic. Yep. So I think it falls into that, and it's very easy to dismiss it as I didn't. It's so easy to dismiss as all of those low levels incivility are, but they are the beginnings, the embryo of the culture that you're creating.
Yeah. Damien, I'll put this one to you. How do you manage confidentiality as a peer supporter, but also ensure that you're providing a duty of care if someone discloses, for example, suicide ideation?
That's a really good question. So we pride ourselves on our confidentiality with our peer supporters on our own organisation. The only time we would break that confidentiality is our potential harm to ourselves or other people, and then that's a duty of care kicks in where you have to report it to the emergency services. So with our peer supporters, through that session that we give them, it's called connector training. Through that connector training, that's those go-to people. Same as the minders. We explain to them about confidentiality. It is not your job to be a go-between employer to employee. And did you hear about Damo? He's having a relationship breakdown, leave him alone, that type of thing. That's not your job. Your job is to be that support for the person. So you're being that go-to person. You've volunteered, you've put your hand up. This person trusts you, respects you, so confidentiality is huge. If you break that confidentiality, you've lost that trust. Now you've got a business hat to put on as well. You've got your company, you've got policies and procedures to follow as well. This is a very delicate line, and it's horses for courses here. Depending on your organisation, on your role within the organisation, are you going to be a connector or a minder, or are you going to be an employee that's going to follow policy and procedure? So you have to make that judgment call yourself. We can't tell you what's right and what's wrong. You have to make that decision. Are you going to pick policy? Are you going to pick person? Where are you going to lean? You have to make that decision. But if they start talking about them harm to themselves or other people, or potentially taking their lives, react appropriately. You may have to call 000 to get the emergency service to do a welfare check. And there's also MERL, which is the Mental Health Emergency Response Line. They can do welfare checks as well. All right. So if there is talk about suicide, you have to act accordingly, duty of care.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Lorna, in maintaining confidentiality, is there a risk that hazard might not then be reported to the business and addressed? How do you balance those competing priorities?
I'll use the example of Resourceful Mind, which Damien has referred to a couple of times, where we have developed that working with the resources sector. There are five training components, and in all of them, they talk about the importance of confidentiality. In session 4, they're spoken about dealing with disclosures of suicide. A disclosure of suicide doesn't require that you necessarily call the ambulance immediately. So if there is someone who's mates in construction and trained in suicide planning, developing a suicide safety plan is absolutely fine. All the companies that, and I was interested because it sounds like you've had experiences, Damien, where policy and the principles of the program don't align, and we haven't found that. To be part of Resourceful Mind, there needs to be a company policy around treatment of the disclosures of suicide. And remember, there's a whole, before someone is suicidal or planning, suicide ideation is, we shouldn't overreact to disclosures of suicide, but we should always ensure that person is safe. And if they can, there are organisations, well, obviously Lifeline, we deal with suicidal thoughts and plans for suicide every day and ensure that we keep people safe. Of the 100,000 calls that Lifeline WA answered last year, only 2% required intervention by emergency services. So about 12% of calls deal with suicide. We developed about 5% of those. We developed a safety plan, and 2% we needed emergency services. So we needed to contact the police. But generally, organisations who have a program particularly as formal as Resourceful Mind or Mates in Construction will have a policy that aligns with our principles around dealing with suicide.
Curious to know, have you guys sort of shared and compared notes at all? There's a question here just asking about differences between, say, Lifeline and Mates.
Yep.
Do you tackle things differently?
No, so where our program fits in with other programs, we are not here to challenge any existing programs, the likes of Minders. We're here to complement them. We walk alongside, we hold hands with any existing programs, because if you're doing something, people are staying alive. And that's why we're not here. We will never challenge anything. We don't challenge employee assistance programs. We don't challenge resourceful minds, mental health first aiders, nothing like that. We will complement them, because it's that peer support model. How our model works is a voluntary-based organisation, a voluntary-based model. So the general awareness is done at the start, which is a blanket for everybody, and then you self-nominate to become the second stage, that peer support, that connector. We would usually go to our point of contact who's organised the sessions. They'll look at the list of names and say, well, no, that person's not doing it, he's a buffhead. This person is a serial trainer to do anything to get out of work for 4 hours. Oh, this person is suitable, this person is suitable, this person is suitable. And it's for a widespread across the organisation. If you lean too heavily towards the management, your workers on the ground won't talk to them. If you lean too heavily down the other side, the managers won't talk to them. So it's a widespread. So then that voluntary side of thing comes through. Ours is really voluntary, and how it works alongside theirs is that peer support model. I don't know how your program is set up, but it's not to challenge any existing programs, it's to complement.
But I've been around a bit longer than Damien, so I do remember when we did work very closely to work with Mates in Construction to develop your phone line, because we utilising Lifeline's expertise in telephone support. So that would have been about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. But the programs, the training that Damien refers to are Living Works, highly regarded, very strongly evidence-based programs. We deliver those programs, but we don't run the Living Works Suicide Safer Community program. But we do deliver all the same training. And so that training is sometimes part if some organisations want it. So we don't deliver one, we work on a bespoke model for different companies. So legal firms need a different program to a resources sector with fly in, fly out. Health organisations they have different challenges. So we have a commercial training arm to Lifeline. We're specialists in training everyday people to support people. Our speciality, I guess, is suicide, but our bread and butter is dealing with day-to-day crisis. We have an in-house instructional designer who develops a range of programs. So we develop a whole range of programs for different companies so that we can develop a peer support model that is right for your organisation. And it's focused much more on the training and listening skills, helping to support people to link up. Where we integrate very well with mates in construction is in those sectors. If mates in construction is embedded in the organisation, we know that company has people who are specialists in safety planning. And so we would have a link-up mechanism that linked up to those people, so they do integrate very well. I think that was a very lengthy way of explaining it, sorry.
All good. We have time, Lorna. That's the beauty of this. Julie, this one might be for you. I think this is, assuming this is a dynamic that plays out in the workplace a lot. So a worker has an issue, with some hazardous behaviour coming from their manager. That worker then complains to someone higher up the food chain, someone in leadership, who then sides with the manager, which can make that worker feel like they're frozen out. Where do they go from there? Should the union rep be the next person that they call?
Okay, look, there's a number of avenues. Perhaps the workplace may or may not have a human resources department, but look, often, first and foremost, a worker should follow any grievance resolution procedure that is in place and any policies, but the union is able to assist at any point in that process as well. It doesn't have to reach a certain point for the union to be involved. So they can always seek support from the union simultaneously to following the other steps. But look, I think those people in that leadership position, they're creating it's a vulnerability to the that due diligence that they have in those senior leadership roles if they aren't investigating complaints properly. If they are siding with a manager, if they aren't following their own procedures. So, but I just want to reiterate, anyone can seek support from a union at any point in a grievance.
Yep. Okay. Damien, one for you. Strategies that you would recommend to target apprentices and younger workers as they will be the next generation of leaders in mining and construction and so on.
Awesome work, well done. We're actively engaged in all the TAFEs and stuff like that, so we actually train regularly. We've trained over 1,000 apprentices this year in our general awareness training, so we're trying to build that capacity now at this stage and normalising that help-seeking ability. We've also now developing an apprenticeship programme. At the moment, we should have it January 1st, ready to go. So it's not so much suicide prevention, it's life skills. We're talking about budgeting, drugs, alcohol, finances, relationships and stuff like that. So it's about building that resilience at this stage, so trying to get them in nice and young. We do lots of work. I see two guys from TAFE down the back here. We do heaps of work with the TAFEs all over the state. We want to do more, so we're actively engaging at that level at this stage, and next year we'll be doing heaps more as well.
Lorna, if someone doesn't want your help, but you can see that they clearly need some help, how do you best manage that?
You can't force help seeking, but you can tell someone that you're there, and that's the best that you can do. And part of any good peer supporter program will address that. So the mates in construction will, and our resourceful mind and all our other peer models do identify that the first thing is to look out for someone and to go and talk to them. don't underestimate that if they don't take your that opportunity, you nonetheless have provided them with a very positive experience. But you cannot force someone to help seek. All you can do is provide the opportunity. And if they say, "Nah, I'm fine," you can say, "Well, if you ever need to speak to me, you know where I am."
Okay. One final question. I know we're getting the wind up. I could see that the giant clock has struck 0, so I'm about to get tasered any minute, I'm sure. But in terms of supporting our First Nations staff network with appropriate and culturally safe EAP or other supports, including internal peer support, how could we best approach that?
Yeah, cool.
Go for it.
I'm not from around here either, so yeah. We are very fortunate. Our CEO, Liam Cubbage, spent a long time working as a case manager in the Pilbara region, going out with local Aboriginal communities and providing that support. So we've got in-house knowledge in that space. Our team goes through the cultural sensitivity training every year. It's kind of like the Bible, but it's the language that we use. We ask people through our training sessions. We come across the First Nations Aboriginal communities, and we ask them, how do we do this better? How do we engage better? The language that we use, we ask the question, are we perfect? God, no, we are nowhere near it, and we don't want to be perfect because we're not learning. And that's why we ask people in our groups from the Aboriginal communities and the First Nations, tell us, you are the professionals in this place, let us know. Please let us know, because knowledge is power and they're the best key to it. So we ask questions, we ask heaps of questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We are out of time. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions this afternoon. A great bunch of questions to put to our panellists. And would you please thank them, Julia, Lorna and Damien, for their contribution this afternoon.